Welcome to the Dorm Next Door, episode 18. It is so great to have you guys back this week. Back to the normal format. I'm back in front of the camera, and I couldn't be more excited. It was kind of a good break having two spectacular guests. They are great guys that are ahead of me, that are older than me, that I can learn from, and I had great conversations with them. So if you haven't watched those episodes, please do. They will not let you down. I kind of brought out the expertise out of both of them. Grant is an expert when it comes to American history and understanding Christianity and its role in the United States of America and its formation up until this point. And Garrett Lawrence is a firecracker. He's really good at just understanding immigration, also current issues of the day. That being said, before I get into this episode is essentially going to be a autobiography of Jeffrey Epstein, his life, how he rose to power. Not necessarily all the things that are encapsulating the story today, not necessarily the files, and not necessarily what we're learning about the horrible and evil things. Obviously, I will touch on those subjects. But the main idea is that it's not really well known by people. And I'm assuming my audience too. Where he came from, how he got into this position of power, and I think that's important to touch on. But before I begin that, I just wanted to say something. If you are discouraged, if you are disgusted, you most likely are if you've read an ounce of these. But just understand this. God has the complete ability, and he does so. He allows evil to happen, yes. But what he does is he uses evil for good, even if we don't understand it, even if we can't see it. And I guarantee you, from the realization that evil exists in this world to the nth degree, that people are really doing things that are unspeakable, that you never thought a human being would do. When you realize that people are doing that, it is enough to make you realize that if evil exists to this degree, what good exists as well. And I'm telling you right now, that good is coming back. And there's going to be hardship beforehand. But just getting into this episode. By the way, I have a broken mic. If you're watching, the microphone is not supposed to look like this. It's like, for those of you that are watching, there's kind of like this rib cage that surrounds the actual microphone itself, and it's just completely cocked diagonally, which is supposed to be straight, level, and it's broken. Anyways, let's start this off from the beginning, all right? Jeffrey Epstein was born on Coney Island in 1953, and he was hired at the Dalton School, the most premier private school in New York City. They get their pick of the teachers across the entire world. They get the best because they are the top school, and they hire Jeffrey Epstein to teach math at 20 years old. No credentials. He went to university for 2 years, dropped out, no teaching credentials, especially to teach high school level math at the number one private school in New York City, which all the billionaires were sending their kids. You get the gist. The headmaster of the school was Donald Barr. This is the father of Bill Barr, the several times over attorney general under both George H.W. Bush and President Trump, that actually presided over the mysterious death of Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. So his father was Donald Barr, who was the headmaster of the Dalton School that hired Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Donald Barr worked for the OSS, which was the predecessor to the CIA during World War II, and he wrote a fiction book called Space Relations. And the story of Space Relations was basically a man who was kidnapped from Earth, I'm pretty sure, and then he's taken to an alien planet ruled by alien oligarchs who then sexually assault children and keep them as slaves. That's the story of Space Relations. And then this man is kept by a female oligarch, and then she takes a liking to him, and then he ends up becoming like that. And he becomes an oligarch himself and then begins doing the evil things as well. But they kidnap kids all across the universe. What are the chances that Jeffrey Epstein would get hired at a school like that and almost mimic the story that is told in that fiction book? I don't know if I believe in chance there. We can't draw any conclusions from that. We can't draw direct causation, but there is some crazy correlation there. It's disgusting. Anyways, so more awful things happen in that book that I'm not going to talk about. But he was working there for 2 years. So he got hired at 20 years old in 1974. The book Space Relations was published the year before he worked there. So that's interesting as well. But he works there for 2 years, gets fired for a poor performance. Obviously, who would have seen that coming, right? No credentials, gets hired for the wrong job that he's not equipped for at all. No resume, no nothing. And then he gets fired 2 years later for poor performance. But it's not just poor performance. No. He was also at the same time flirting with female students who were underage, and he would show up at high school parties. This was the kind of guy he is. Now, a 20-year-old, cut him a tiny bit of slack because he's 20 years old. He shouldn't be in the job in the first place, but still disgusting and weird, right? But completely, if I can even say this, it's more normal than what he ended up doing later in his life because he was 20 years old then. I'm just going to move on. I don't know what I'm talking about. But he was fired in 1976 from the Dalton School, citing poor performance. Then right after that, in the exact same year, he goes to work at Bear Stearns, one of the top firms on Wall Street. Why? How? Well, while he was there, he met a parent, and he convinced that parent to acquaint him with a guy named Alan Greenberg, who was the CEO of Bear Stearns. And apparently Alan Greenberg was impressed by Jeffrey Epstein, so he offered Jeffrey Epstein a job as a junior-level stock trader on the floor of Bear Stearns. So he's 20 years old. He just got fired. He's been hired by Alan Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns, who I'm pretty sure that his kids went there at the time. So then he gets hired there. After that, he works and he gets promoted extremely quickly at the Bear Stearns. He gets promoted extremely quickly, and then by the time he is 26 years old, he is a limited partner at the firm. Now, a limited partner means that they have limited liabilities. They don't get to make decisions on the general operations of the firm. However, it is a big deal. No 26-year-old that doesn't graduate from college, no 26-year-old that goes and works at a high school and then gets taken in, it's just, he's winning the lottery consecutively. All right. So what we know about Epstein so far is that he's literally just beating the odds. He's doing things that aren't really possible. Okay. And then he becomes a limited partner. No 26-year-old without a college degree is going to be getting the position of limited partner, let alone at the, let's say, maybe it's the top firm on Wall Street at the time. It was huge before it crashed, before it folded, before it got acquired by JP Morgan. It was a big deal. Then he has a regulatory, he makes a regulatory violation. So from there, in 1981, from being limited partner, he makes a simple regulatory violation. He gets let go from Bear Stearns, but he maintains a very good relationship with the CEO then, Alan Greenberg, and then the later CEO until 2008, who was Alan Greenberg. So he basically leaves on great terms after having to be fired. Maybe they threw him under the bus, I don't know. But he gets fired. That same year in 1981, he is seen on a private jet with Douglas Leese on his way to a meeting at the Pentagon. He won the lottery again. But this gap from him being fired is a very, very mysterious time, and it's an important time to actually figuring out the key to understanding how he was put on this trajectory to eventually become the awful human being that he died as, or I don't even know at this point. So in 1991, he is on a private jet with a guy named Douglas Leese, who is a British weapons dealer. Now, 1981 is significant because this marks the beginning of the Iran-Contra scandal. And this period of time was when the United States government had to hire the criminals to do the criminal work. So you saw people like Robert Maxwell, allegedly, we're going to get into that later, and a Saudi weapons dealer named Adnan Khashoggi, and Douglas Leese, all these people kind of, and including a guy named Ben Menashe, I'm going to talk about all these people that are kind of integrated to work with the government. They're beginning to contract with the government because the government is doing something illegal. They are doing something that they shouldn't. They are selling weapons to the Contra, and they are selling weapons to Iranians for hostages. Big no-no, right? We do not negotiate with terrorists. Anyways, so Epstein, during this period of time, was most likely introduced to Douglas Leese from either Alan Greenberg, whomever. Somebody introduced him to Douglas Leese, most likely at Bear Stearns, because they were managing the accounts for very, very wealthy individuals. That's what Epstein was doing just before he left. He was entrusted with big accounts as well. So this is kind of when he starts to develop relationships with very wealthy people. After that, after he was released from Bear Stearns, he began working with weapons dealers, specifically Adnan Khashoggi, who was the first weapons dealer that he really worked for. I know he was appearing with Douglas Lee's, but his relationship with Adnan Khashoggi is very, very important. This was a guy that was a very, very wealthy Saudi businessman in the 1980s. He was known for his lavish lifestyle, and he was a weapons dealer. Now, he began working for him during the Iran-Contra affair is when they brought him in to begin working with these people. I know the argument is that he met Robert Maxwell in the 1990s. That's probably not true. He most likely met him when Epstein was brought in to money launder, which was what Robert Maxwell was allegedly doing as well during the Iran-Contra affair. So both Epstein and Robert Maxwell were both seen to be money launderers during the Iran-Contra scandal. And it was agencies like the CIA and Mossad who began approaching Epstein around this time, which we most likely think that he started working for them. Now, here's the question. Who is Robert Maxwell? The father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who is less important in the story than people actually realize. But Robert Maxwell is major. Even in world history, he's going to go down in history. Because he began working for Mossad in around 1947 and 1948. He was very, very vital to the early state of Israel. He was somebody that worked as a spy for Mossad and was an agent for Mossad for a period of time, but he never stopped working for them for the rest of his life. He eventually transitioned to becoming an asset and an informant. He became a very, very wealthy man. He was a great businessman. He had a media empire, and he was acquiring companies in his late 50s and around the late 1980s in the early 90s. And so what he did was he continued to fund the state of Israel. And so he started giving Israel money out of his company's pension fund. So from there, he finally got caught because he ran out of money. He had about $780 million missing. I actually think that this is translated, I think it's pounds. All right. And then he has 400 million pounds missing from his company's pension fund, which he was pulling from the entire time, and he finally got caught because there was no money left over. So you know what he did in response. Robert Maxwell goes to Mossad and he says, I covered for you for X amount of years. I gave you money. I did all these things. You're going to have my back, and if you don't, I'm going to expose all of you. Then in 1991, a few weeks later, he was found dead, drowned outside of his yacht. They ruled his death was maybe an accident, but there was evidence of struggle. But we can't say that he was killed by them. I can't even say that right here. I'm not saying that. But he was found dead. This is when it gets a little bit more blurry. But around the same period of time, when he dies with his net worth of about $1 to $2 billion, this is when we see the beginning of Jeffrey Epstein, whom appears around this time with the same amount of wealth. And then that's in the early 90s is when we see Jeffrey Epstein kind of grow into the figure that he ended up being in these elite circles with these very, very wealthy individuals, these powerful celebrities. So we see him in these videos with all these people. These pictures start to be taken, right? But the accusation, right, that Robert Maxwell was working for Mossad during the Iran-Contra affair really comes from Ben Menashe. Now, Ben Menashe was actually one of the first people to blow the whistle on the Iran-Contra affair in terms of he was a part of it. He was also Israeli intelligence, and then he goes and he tells Time magazine, and he says, hey, all this stuff was going on. Now, it wasn't even, when he talked to Time magazine, Robert Maxwell wasn't a part of the picture. He wasn't telling them about what Robert Maxwell did specifically. But what he was doing was he was saying, hey, we did this. We did these things. The Iran-Contra affair happened. He tried to explain it to Time magazine. Time magazine didn't publish it. And then Ben Menashe goes on to write a book in 1992 called Prophets of War Inside the Secret U.S.-Israeli Arms Network by Ben Menashe. And this is where he says that Robert Maxwell was a part of the Iran-Contra affair as a money launderer. Now, everything else that Ben Menashe has said has been corroborated by Congress. This is the one thing that they try and discredit Ben Menashe for, but they can't disprove him. So what I'm going to believe Ben Menashe, whom was there, whom has his story corroborated, and I'm going to say yes, Robert Maxwell was most likely involved in the Iran-Contra affair. These accusations have been recently revived because of the Epstein files. The Epstein files have revived a lot of these claims that they tried to put to sleep in the past. With the 3.5 million files that we have, we literally have Jeffrey Epstein confirming that the death of Robert Maxwell was because he got into fights with Mossad over the $400 million that he told Israel they owed him and that they killed him. This is Jeffrey Epstein in his emails in 2018 confirming this same thing. So it's kind of a full circle here where the claims were made in the past, people came forward, they got silenced, people probably got killed, Robert Maxwell got killed, and then we're finally vindicated today when the files finally come out and they find out that a lot of people were actually right. They weren't crazy. Robert Maxwell's downfall was that he got into arguments with Mossad and said that he was going to expose them. That could have been the same fate that Jeffrey Epstein had. We have no reason to think that Jeffrey Epstein didn't want to expose all of them as well. He probably did. And so Robert Maxwell was somebody that will go down in history disconnected from that as well. He also owned McGraw-Hill textbooks, which you and I most likely read from. If you attended a public school, or let alone a private school in the United States of America, you probably have read from a McGraw-Hill textbook. And he owned those in the latter years of your life. Weird thing. Stuff just keeps transpiring. Anyways, though, now Robert Maxwell's out of the picture. And I'm not saying there's direct, causation here, correlation, but Jeffrey Epstein reappears around the same time and starts to gain prominence and influence within these groups. And he has around the same net worth. Buys an island in 1998 where he has all these friends, which he has gained because obviously he lives two different lives, right? He was a degenerate, always was. And then at the same time he was intelligence, but he was also in business. And we literally see this in the 2-hour release interview between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein that we realize it was a good interview for understanding how the world works. He was universally agreed upon between all the world's elites that he was the guy to go to for advice, which means he was probably an intelligence asset, not necessarily a spy. But what we do understand is Epstein was Jewish, and the Jews are essentially the most tight-knit race of people that are the most tribal. They look out for each other. They look out for the survival of their nation. That's how they see it, right? They see it as do or die. So he was an intelligence asset at this time. It's obvious. It's confirmed in the files. And so what he was doing was he was able to have a lot of this information. He knew a lot, so people went to him for information, and then in return, he probably relayed that information back to Mossad, and also we know he worked with the CIA. He probably worked for several different intelligence agencies, albeit that, but mainly Mossad, and secondary, the CIA. So he buys the island in 1998. This is when the disgusting things begin to occur. Now, let me ask you this. What's the one thing that you cannot come back from? It's being with a kid. So if you can catch somebody with a camera, because we know that the rooms on his island were rigged by cameras, then you know that's the one thing that somebody cannot come back from. So you blackmail these people. You catch them doing something. Maybe they're drunk. I don't know. A lot of them made these conscious decisions. But let's say you didn't. You're still caught. There's footage of you. You can get this person to do, say, whatever you want. Especially when they're all friends and they're all the most powerful people in the world. Because Jeffrey Epstein wasn't even somebody that was entirely running this thing himself because he was guilty as well. He could have been blackmailed as well because he did those things too. So I don't even necessarily know if we have the entire picture for that. There's a lot of files that have been released. But let me ask you this. I know that Jeffrey Epstein is extremely intelligent, and you should too. He's not just an idiot. I think he understood that by the time the files were released, anybody that's mentioned would most likely be incriminated. We assume that Jeffrey Epstein was telling the truth 24/7 in the Epstein files in the emails. I'm not saying either. I'm not taking a side, but this is just devil's advocate. This is food for thought. Him knowing that, he could have intentionally mentioned people in the files that were innocent. And that's crazy to say because I'm led to believe I know that they're all evil. But it also is something that he could have used as a very valuable tool. To mention somebody that's an enemy of his, maybe they did less than he says, whatever it is, he could have very well used those files, understanding how powerful they would be when they were released, as the main method to take people out because he could incriminate them. We take all those files as absolute evidence. That's just an idea that I have. Because he could be more strategic than we give him credit. So he could, let's say somebody didn't go to the island. He could have said they did. We would believe it. And I'm not saying that to be true. I'm very led to believe that these people did these things. I'm led to believe it. But it is actually in the realm of possibility that there's probably somebody in the files that's innocent that Epstein wanted to make look bad, so he wrote an email about him knowing it would be released one day. That's just an idea that I have. He was smart. He advised Ehud Barak, whom lived in one of his apartments, former Prime Minister of Israel, in 1999, for his 2019 run for the Prime Minister position in Israel, right before Jeffrey Epstein died. He was brought onto the Trilateral Commission, which was ran by David Rockefeller, whom formed a coalition between the world's bankers, the world's businessmen, and the world's politicians, because according to David Rockefeller, while, yeah, politicians come and go, you serve 4 years as the President of the United States, maybe 8 years if you're lucky, and then you go away. But businessmen can be around with their influence, power, and money for their entire lives. And so they created this Trilateral Commission, which was essentially Europe, Asia, and North America. And it was a team of all those guys, all the best, that would work together and make decisions for the world. That's probably surface level, right? There's probably stuff that goes on a lot deeper, but now you're getting an idea of how the world really works. The Epstein files is really a key to understanding the world better. The interview between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein is our key to understanding the world better. That's what I hope that you got from this. But if anybody says that they didn't know Jeffrey Epstein was doing anything illegal, probably not true. As we go further, 2005, an open investigation begins on Jeffrey Epstein. 2008, he gets arrested. Alexander Acosta, who is a U.S. district attorney in Southern Florida at the time, gets told in passing, don't touch Epstein, he's intelligence. And then, in 2008, we see Jeffrey Epstein get the biggest softball of a plea deal. He gets 13 months in prison for soliciting a minor for prostitution. 13 months for that. And then Jeffrey Epstein brags in an interview with Steve Bannon about how that doesn't matter. It didn't limit him being in prison. I mean, he got 2 phone calls a day. Yeah, he says he could call 20 people on any regular day, but now he had to finally be strategic and pick who he wanted to call. Do you know how he found out about the 2008 stock market crash? From the CEO of Bear Stearns. He was still friends with him, even after being convicted and going to prison for doing an awful thing. For doing something that you wouldn't talk to somebody after that. That person would be dead to you. Obviously, there's something to be said about following up with somebody. I don't know. Like asking somebody to really do it. That level of communication. Yeah, whatever. But why are these people still talking to him? That just shows how sick these people really are. They maintain their friendships regularly. He said that it doesn't matter where I am. If I'm in prison, in my apartment, on my island, I can call the exact same people. I have access to the same people. He talked about how he would meet with the presidents of all these different countries. Israel, United States of America, China. Doesn't matter. He has access to these people wherever he goes. He meets with whoever he wants because he's the guy to go to for advice, because he explains, well, I understand currency really, really well. So it's 2008. The stock market collapses. And so you have the CEO of Bear Stearns on the phone with him, explaining to him what happens. And then after that, he calls the person from JP Morgan who's responsible for the acquisition of Bear Stearns. And that could be the CEO today. That could be Jay. I'm not saying it is. I'm not. I'm actually saying the opposite. Don't believe what I say. Don't believe this. But it very well could be that even the CEO of JP Morgan Chase was talking to Jeffrey Epstein on the phone, because he says, he didn't give a name, but Epstein said that the person he was talking to on the phone was the person responsible for the acquisition of Bear Stearns right after the stock market crash, which is true. JP Morgan Chase got Bear Stearns because Bear Stearns was at the center of the 2008 crash. Then Epstein's out of prison. People continued to meet with him. This was when he started to accelerate his relationship with Peter Thiel and help give him ideas for Palantir, which is the AI data analytics company that is responsible for the mass surveillance of our entire country. They're surveilling you and me. He met with Elon Musk in 2014. right? If anybody claims that they didn't know what Jeffrey Epstein, they're a liar. Because in 2008, he was convicted of those crimes. So if somebody maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after that point, they're probably guilty too. If you were friends with that person after they served 13 months because they were convicted and they got a plea deal, who cares? You know what kind of person they are. Why do you maintain your friendship with them? And then all of a sudden today, when all the files come out, you say, oh, I didn't know. I wasn't. It's like that Danny DeVito video. I went to the island, but it was for the snorkeling. You're all liars. It's so crazy to me that people have the gall. Now, Jeffrey Epstein continues his life. His plea deal expires. Jeffrey Berman, who was the New York Southern District U.S. Attorney, convicts and he gets Epstein on July 6, 2019, when he returns from France. July 8th comes, and then Jeffrey Epstein is then brought charges against him, which is sex trafficking of minors, right? The stuff that he was doing the entire time. Okay? And then Bill Barr, the son of Donald Barr. Bill Barr, little background on him. Bill Barr worked for the CIA. He was the liaison during the Church and Pike hearings, which was essentially him saying to Church and Pike in Congress that, oh, we're cool. CIA's, we behaved ourselves. Liar. But he was the advocate of the CIA. George H.W. Bush liked him so much, he ended up working under George H.W. Bush at the CIA because George H.W. Bush was the CIA director. And then George H.W. Bush becomes president of the United States. Who's the attorney general? Bill Barr. Young attorney general, too. And then Bill Barr becomes the attorney general under Trump for the first 2 years of the Trump. I think it was like either the first or the last 2 years. Half the Trump administration, he is also the attorney general. He presides over the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, and he's the one that declares that Jeffrey Epstein's death on August 10th, 2019 was a suicide, with 2 minutes and 53 seconds of security camera footage missing. Completely missing. They still can't account for it. And if anybody tries to come up with an excuse, whether it's Pam Bondi who should be fired, who should resign, they're a liar. That is beginning to end. I probably left something out. I wanted to just get you to this level of this is what we're dealing with. But God knows what's going on. It's a full circle here. It's super, super interesting. But from beginning to end, we have seen the evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was extremely intellectual. Everybody went to him for advice. We literally saw, there's video footage in 2019, right, of Jeffrey Epstein giving advice to a woman in Congress during a congressional hearing so that this woman could better question the President of the United States. She wasn't questioning the President of the United States directly, but she was asking questions, getting advice from Jeffrey Epstein via text, getting information on Donald Trump's former executive secretary. This was the kind of stuff. He knew everyone. Everyone knew him. He was literally like an axiom amongst the elite. He was a universally agreed upon truth that he was the guy to go to for advice because apparently he understood currency so well. I don't know. But he was smart. People don't understand it. He was. Now, he's stupid to the degree that he thinks that he doesn't have to face God. He bought this ranch in New Mexico where his goal was to make like 20 of himself so he wanted to have a bunch of kids. It was like a kid factory. It was disgusting. But this is the kind of things that these elites do. They are afraid to face God, so they try to live forever. Peter Thiel wants to live forever. He gets asked in a New York Times interview, what do you want humanity to do? Do you want humanity to endure? He can't come up with an answer. You know what he says?
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would.
This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit in this.
Should the human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
But I also would I also would like us to radically solve these problems.
Right.
And so, it's always, I don't know, transhumanism is this, the ideal was this radical transformation where your human natural body gets transformed into an immortal body. And there's a critique of, let's say, the trans people in a sexual context, or I don't know, a transvestite is someone who changes their clothes and cross dresses, and a transsexual is someone where you change your, I don't know, penis into a vagina, and we can then debate how well those surgeries work. But we want more transformation than that. It's the critique is not that it's weird and unnatural. It's, man, it's so pathetically little. And okay, we want more than cross dressing or changing your sex organs. We want you to be able to change your heart and change your mind and change your whole body.
He says, oh, well, humanity should become a part of this larger conscience. You're afraid to face God because you know what's going to happen. These people agree. They know God exists. When Jeffrey Epstein is asked this,
I think you're the devil himself.
No, but I do have a good mirror.
It's a serious question.
Sorry.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
I don't know. Why would you say that?
Because you have all the attributes. You're incredibly smart. You remember the devil is somebody
the
knows
devil's
the devil's brilliant. You read Milton's Paradise Lost.
No, the devil scares me.
obviously he knows that God exists. He's literally afraid to say the name of Jesus.
Socrates could think. So that was...
Jesus of Nazareth was the same way, right? Never wrote anything.
I thought he was a carpenter.
He was a carpenter.
Didn't he need like a little carpenter's tonight? I don't get that.
But at least his written record.
This is a crazy world that we're living in. But just know this. God will have his justice. He doesn't just allow evil to happen. He turns it into good, which is what he's going to do with this. I guarantee you there's thousands of people that have come to Christ from this because they see such evil take place. They know that there is an equal and opposite reaction to that. They might not face justice in this lifetime, but I'll tell you, everybody faces God. Everybody faces a just God. But that's just a snapshot of his life. How he was a money launderer. He was an intelligence asset. He managed big accounts. Les Wexner gave him a $250 million townhome in New York City. Not just as a gift of friendship, but because he most likely was the cool guy that was able to get the billionaire nerds in front of a girl. It's disgusting. But it's true. He supplied. And that's what these weird men want. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday. I said, who runs the world? And he goes, alpha males. And I'm like, that is not even further from the truth. If you see these people, they are weird. Bill Gates, weird. Have you seen the video of Bill Gates getting slapped in the face with a pie? Like, watch the way he reacts. He starts shaking. Like, these are not tough people. They're not cool people. A lot of time, they're not even smart. You should listen to some of them talk. What we're up against is a bunch of people, a bunch of nerds with a lot of money that are on a one-way ticket to hell. What can I say? Jesus Christ is Lord. God is good. And I thank you so much for listening to episode 18, a dense, informative episode. And actually, I kept it under a half an hour, just around a half an hour, which is pretty cool too. So I just thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'll see you all next week. Roll the outro. Take care.